privileged to have worked and flown in one of the most professional air forces in the world and the fourth largest air force in the world, which is the Indian Air Force. Let me tell you one small incident about 15 years back when I was still part of this great Air Force was when the Americans and we were doing flying exercises and they had their most modern aircraft and we had our Su-30 MKIs along with air-to-air refuelers and AVAC aircraft, and the air combat was going on. We won 90% of the air combat missions against the Americans, which is considered to be amongst the most professional air forces in the world. And they went back and said that it is very difficult to defeat Indians in Su-30 aircraft, and therefore the F-22 Raptor, which was going to be shelved, was re-given a lease of life. That is the Air Force that I belong to, and I have had the privilege to fly all versions of the MiG-21. It is called a flying coffin. Let me tell you, it was one of the best aircraft that I flew because it took out the best of me in flying. It was very tough to fly, but it was a very good aircraft. I have thousands of hours on the MiG-21s, thousands on the MiG-23, BNs and MiG-27s. Then I've done pleasure flying in Mirage 2000, Sukhoi 30, Jaguar, as well as had the privilege to fly the transport aircraft Avro and the attack helicopter Mi-25 35. You can see that I was part of the Top Gun School of India on the right hand side bottom as the youngest instructor in tactics and air combat development establishment, where I flew the MiG-21s, 23s. In fact, when I was flying them in different details, different aircraft, I was caught by the commandant and he said, no more fly one type in this course and thereafter you decide which type you want to fly. But I have flown with the best of the best in the Indian Air Force, and I have learned only one thing: those who do not learn from the lessons of history are doomed to repeat it. Ladies and gentlemen, I will be covering the 1962 war through an Air Force lens, and I would like to describe various aspects of it. And let me tell you and ask you, have we learned from the 1962 war? Now, if we look at the force levels between PLAF and IAF at that period of time, let me give you a small background. You know, 1950s and 60s were tumultuous period for the Chinese. They had just fought a war from June 1950 to July 1953 in Korea, and there were a number of aircraft which were still deployed of theirs near the 38th parallel. Similarly, they had just got the formation of People's Republic of China in 1949, and they were at war virtually all the time with the Republic of China, that is Taiwan, which was called as Formosa at that time. So 1954 to 55 was a period when they wanted to occupy the islands of Matsu and Kinmen, and they were fighting with them. And also again in 1958, meanwhile, the Americans had sent their 7th Fleet over there, and there was a great amount of pressure on the Chinese to maintain their latest fighters near Taiwan at the time of late 1950s and early 60s. So when we look at the Chinese Air Force, we need to keep this in mind. And remember, Vietnam was just starting to happen at that time. So the fighter strength of the Chinese was 1350, were 50 MiG-15s and 17s, which were obsolete aircraft. And MiG-19s were just 150. And these MiG-19s were the ones that were deployed mostly near the Korea and near the Taiwan frontier. Then came the IL-28 bombers, which the political establishment and the director I.B. Malik were so scared of, which were IL-28, which were 500 in numbers. But as I go ahead and discuss with you, I will tell you how difficult it was for the Chinese to have used these aircraft in the Tibetan Autonomous Region. Indian Air Force, meanwhile, had 18 squadrons of fighters which were more modern than the Chinese, included Hunters and Tufanis. And we had in addition 3 Canberra light bomber squads which were much better than the IL-28s. So this is the comparison, that when you do 500 combat aircraft against what is the aircraft that Chinese would have put, and we could have utilized many of our aircraft in the air bases that we had. In addition to that, we had large number of transport aircraft, which was 10 to 11 squads, which were part of the forward deployment operations and air maintenance, which we did extensively throughout the war, including we did a lot of Canberra missions in terms of photo reconnaissance. 22 of them were flown at Saichin and near Sela and also near Bumla. But at the same time, when we gave an input to the political establishment in December 1959 regarding a road that had been constructed from Tibet right up to Xinjiang and that passed through Saichin, and that the deployment of the Chinese had started in the late 1959 and early 1960s, which was not really taken very seriously by the political establishment. Now, what was the reason? Why was the IF not used in combat role? This was attributed to the belief in the highest echelons of, I would say, mostly political leadership, that it would be escalatory and provoke the Chinese to attack our cities which would be vulnerable to the Chinese air bombardment. Which cities? We were looking at cities such as Delhi, Calcutta, Chennai. Now, as we go and look at the airfields that were available at that period of time, you see what were the airfields. Kashgar and Hotan may have been there available to the Chinese, but Hotan would have been more like an airstrip. But the main airfield of theirs was actually Lhasa. So as I come to Lhasa, let me just go over Kashgar and Hotan. The distance of Kashgar, even if we were to use the IL-28 bombers, to Leh was 605. Now when we look at IL-28, it says it has a range of 2,500 kilometers. But this is a range flying at 10 kilometers with no weapon payload and also not coming back. It is like a crow flies going straight, and that too without weapon payload or tactical routing. So when we look at radius of action, that means going and attacking a target and coming back, this reduces to much lower and comes to a figure of 700 to 750 kilometers. That is all. So only Leh they could have reached from Kashgar, and also certain areas they could have reached from Hotan, but Delhi was too far away, well beyond the radius of action from both Kashgar and Hotan. And Hotan would have been neutralized very soon at the beginning of the war itself. Now we come to the other aircraft that were there, fighters, MiG-19. What was the radius of action? 300 to 350 kilometers. It would not even have covered Ladakh, which means a tactical battle area would not have been covered by the MiG-19, even if it operated from Kashgar or Hotan. So as Ladakh, we would have had complete air superiority in no time had the Indian Air Force been pushed into anger, into combat area. Now we are looking at Lhasa. I will just show you a picture of Lhasa. Lhasa was the only airfield, Gongar airfield, which was 220 kilometers from Tawang. So this is the only airfield that could have made any difference to the tactical battle area in Nefa or in any other location which was close by, close to the McMahon line. Now, when we are looking at this airfield, there were no tunnels then, there were no blast fans then, there were hardly any logistic support, no runway rehabilitation, high altitude airfield, and look at the condition of the airfield. This is a picture taken well after 1962, but you can see even in this condition how the airfield looked at that time. And how would they have put the aircraft? They have put the aircraft like this, which means that the aircraft would have been in the open, to be seeked and destroyed by the Indian Air Force. They would have been easy meat for us. So this was the only airfield which we really needed to put down, and that would have been put down in the first day itself with the aircraft that we had, who had the range, who could operate from the planes. So when we look at Lhasa airfield only, we could have neutralized it on the first day. Which are the other airfields that could have been taken into action? Pangda. As you can see, Pangda is here. Now, Pangda is about, very far as Calcutta is concerned, but 800 kilometers from Calcutta, which Lhasa is 800 kilometers from Calcutta, but Pangda is a distance which is much more than 1,000 kilometers from Calcutta. So when we are looking at an airfield which is not likely to affect the cities which were so feared upon, So the airfield has no other meaning. It could have maybe affected by the IL-28s in the tactical battle area, but again, the fighters that they would have encountered were much better than the IL-28 bomber that could have come. So last airfield that could have been taken into account was Kunming, which is in Yunnan province, and it is 1500 kilometers from Calcutta. So what was the political establishment so scared of? And I'll be covering this as a lesson in the end when I'll be telling you exactly how a political interference can finish off. And just showing you the tactical routing, and you'll find they can barely reach Tezpur even from Yunnan, barely reach Chabua even from Yunnan. The second thing which the political establishment was scared was, they said, what would be the effectiveness of close air support in high Himalayas, especially below the snow line in jungle terrain? I say, if the enemy forces are in direct contact, hand-to-hand combat, yes, close air support is extremely difficult by high-intensity fighter flying. But when we look at the areas all around, except those which are highly wooded, which are very close to our own locations, look at this. 6 AMX-13 tanks were airlifted from Chandigarh to Chushul so as to stem the tide of the Chinese to reach there. Look at the terrain around it. Absolutely flat. Even if a mosquito flies, it will be caught and then destroyed. So what I am trying to tell you is, the Chinese supply lines, the lines of communication would have been extremely vulnerable to the air attacks by hunters, mystiers, Tufanis, and even by our own bombers, which is Canberra. So when I'm looking at this terrain, I will say battlefield air interdiction, close air support is highly probable and possible. So even when we go into terrain which is north of the McMahon line, there are many areas where it is flat and undulating though, but flat, where they are getting into narrow profiles and their lines of communication, forces moving forward, the divisions that were being reinforced could have easily been interdicted, and we could have cut off their supply lines very well. So to say that close air support would not have been possible completely would be inaccurate. That is why a tactical air centers were already established by 33 corps. Our forward air controllers were there, our pilots were sitting in the cockpit, and we were speaking to one of the pilots, an air marshal who retired as an air marshal, and he was saying that daily we used to sit in the cockpits waiting when the signal will come to go. The last was that another factor was that our transport aircraft, which were involved in air transportation and air supply, could have been attacked by the Chinese fighters. Which Chinese fighters? MiG-19s. And MiG-19s had a radio of action, like I told you, of 300 to 350 kilometers. They would not be affected over Ladakh. They would not have been affected over Nefa, except from one airfield, which was Lhasa, which we would have destroyed on the first day as counter-air operations, as you will learn in your course when you do at the Staff College, is the first prime action that Indian Air Force or any Air Force does so as to ensure that the enemy aircraft do not interfere with our surface force operations. Last is that integrated joint planning between the two services was a question which could be a question even today, but that is not what is going to be taken into account when you take a political decision of whether you're going to use an air force or not, your strongest arm or not, when we had done an unbiased comparison between the two. So if the IF could have been used, it could have caused devastation and havoc on the Chinese. And why do I say that? Chinese airfields were at high altitudes, limited payloads, low air densities, difficulty of maintenance, no runway rehabilitation, hardly any runway rehabilitation. So when we had so many difficulties, Indian Air Force airfields had none. We even had some blast pens. They didn't even have blast pens at that period of time. So what is it if we could have operated from planes? When we look at north, we had airfields starting from Daulak Beg, Oldie, Leh, Srinagar, Pathankot, Ambala, Halwara, Adampur, Amritsar, and right up to Delhi. Even Delhi had a Palam air base at that time. So we would have aircraft which would have intercepted any of the IL-28 bombers. Even if they wanted to come towards Delhi, they would have been neutralized by the time they came to even Ambala. And they didn't have the radius of action in any case. So let us say even if they wanted to come in a kamikaze attack. Now, next issue is if they could have been effective over the TBN. No, because of the strength that we had, because of the aircraft that we had, because of the airfields that were located and available in planes which would allow a far more bomb load to be carried by the Indian Air Force than the Chinese Air Force could have carried. But where we really performed was in the role that was given to us, which was air transportation. We had 10 to 11 squadrons of transport aircraft. We had the latest of that time, AN-12, which could carry 10 to 12 tons. And remember the AN-12 picture that I had shown carrying the AMX-13 tanks, 6 of them to Chushul. Then Dakotas, we had 2 tons load, Packet 6 tons load, IL-14 Otters, Caribous. We even had Super Constellation aircraft. So we were supplying and flying continuously and providing support. Our support increased from 1179 hours in September to 3,263 hours, and we dropped and we supplied close to hundreds and thousands of tons of load. We even kept the troops continuously moving. Even our helicopter pilots were killed or captured or tortured, and even some of our transport aircraft were shot badly from the small arms fire when they were providing support at the time where the enemy had already encircled our troops. So like I showed it to you, this picture, the role of our transport aircraft. Now I come back to the combat roles. Had the decision been taken by the IF, let me tell you, the main person who were the 3 main people who made Nehru not to take that decision. The first one was Blackett, who was the British military advisor. The second one was Galbraith, the US ambassador. Imagine, you want to go to the US, you want to go to the British people, but you don't want to ask the Air Force that whether we should use you or not. The air chief was not even part of the China Council. The defense minister nor the IB director Malik asked him. He asked the CIA. We requested the Americans to provide us 12 squadrons of F-104 aircraft and 4 squadrons of B-47 bombers, but we didn't want to ask the Air Force. Even if there was one odd person in the Air Force who may have felt differently, but majority of the Air Force, including our Marshal of the Air Force, who was at that time an Air Vice Marshal, Marshal Arjun Singh, had clearly indicated that use the Air Force, this is the time. He himself had got DFC in the same area, Nefa, where in the same area northeast, where he had attacked the Japanese troops in Arakan, and half his squadron strength had died trying to support the British and Indian army there. So we could have used, had we used the apprehension of the Chinese air power, totally misplaced. In Ladakh, which I had shown you the pictures, was devoid of vegetation, north of Bumla, north of McMahon Line, many places, their resupplies, their divisions that were coming later. We could have really created havoc. Just a little bit of background I can show on this. Let's see this blue line to be Sangpo River and the red line to be McMahon line. And I would say that there were very few bridges at that time in the Sangpo. We could have easily destroyed them. And there were very few crossing points. There were very few ingress points. And all these ingress points could have been located, identified, attacked, and we could have isolated the tactical battle area, not just in offense, even in withdrawal, even in defeat. We could have caused a significant defeat even later on to the Chinese forces, which had come right up to the foothills. If we had isolated their supply lines by using air interdiction or battlefield air interdiction or close air support in areas where we could have attacked them, which could have been possible at Bumla, which could have been possible even at Walong. I just want to show you a picture of this, of Munto Dhalo camp, which first came to light on 27 May 1999. And this was the camp which was supplying to certain key areas on our side where the Pakistani forces had infiltrated. And just 4 Mirage 2000 with dumb bombs. Not even with precision bombs, with just dumb bombs made a mincemeat of this in the same high altitude terrain that we are talking of today. And a well orchestrated air campaign had the capability to create devastation with the Chinese. Our aircrew were experienced, they were waiting, and they were sitting in the cockpits. They were flying practice closer support missions with the tactical air centers that had been established. And had we been used, we could have really turned the tide along with the brave Indian army that was virtually fighting till the last man. And the bravery stories, even today, when I hear or read or go and see actually in those places there, when we have gone in our staff college visits or in our visits of higher command course, and there also we feel that the great army, we could have really supported it had the Indian Air Force been used. So let's look at the lessons. Have we learned any lessons from this 1962 war? The first lesson is he will win who has military capacity, and it is not interfered by the sovereign. That means by the political leadership. Now, when we come here, why did I use this one? Because this is from Sun Tzu. And Sun Tzu, why use Sun Tzu when we have many of our own? Is because we are talking of China war. And he says he will win who knows when to fight and when not to fight. We did a forward deployment. We did not know when to fight. He will win who knows how to handle both superior and inferior forces. We did not know how to handle superior forces. He will win whose army is animated by the same spirit throughout all its ranks. Our Indian army was animated with the same spirit, and our morale was high. But what I am talking of here is that we did not use our Air Force, another supporting arm which was stronger than the Chinese in this area. He will win who prepare himself and catches the enemy unprepared. We were caught unprepared. Our intelligence was poor. Again in Galwan, I would like you to take your mind there also. Were we really prepared? And lastly, he will win who has the military capacity. While the Chinese were building up the military capacity from late 1959, early 60 onwards, we were not building our military capacity because, like General Sandhu said, we were more worried about the intent than worried about the capability. And again, which is not interfered by the sovereign. Decisions, political decisions were being taken, decisions about who to be put as a general, who to be fighting where, what force to be used and what not force to be used, though it is finally the political decision, but it should be a calculated decision. It should be a decision taking all the services along with you. Second is utilize your strengths against the enemy's weak areas. They were not utilized. Joint and integrated planning is must, which I wish that there is a lot of improvement that has taken place now, and I wish that from joint planning it becomes integrated planning with you all who are going to become the pillars of strength as you come towards the Army and the Air Force operations. And lastly, intelligence is the key to strategic, operational and tactical war fighting, which is a golden principle even now. And one more principle I want to cover, the platinum principle. The political side had lost the will to fight. They were willing to give up Assam. Can you believe it? The instructions had come to the Air Force to destroy the aircraft if they had not flown off from Tezpur by 22nd November and to destroy the airfield there. This is because the Chinese had reached the foothill. We didn't want to use this aircraft against the Chinese. We wanted to destroy them themselves. So the political will had been lost to save our country. And I would say that this will is extremely important whenever we go for operations. And it is the political will which will determine what type of operations and where we would be carrying them out. What is the position today? Now, China has learned from it. They have developed 15 to 16 airfields all over Tibetan Autonomous Region, Xinjiang, as well as in Yunnan province. And they have made blast bins also. They have got tunnels. They are keeping their weapon system. They've got an integrated air defense with 192 modern launchers and 490 of the old launcher variety. They've got S-300s, HQ-9, HQ-22 deployed there, including in Chumbi Valley and Lipu Lake. And they have even S-400 deployed at Nyangchi and Hotan. So they are now making this area completely integrated both with air defense and ground, and this is going to be one of the areas that you have to look at. If you look at this airfield, which is Nagari Gunsa, look at the picture taken in 6th April 2020 and look at the picture taken on 21st May 2020, and you see the large amount of development that took place, which means the Chinese knew Galwan was going to happen. And that is what we have to take always, not the intent. Like General Sandhu said, the capability which China is building, and we have to match that capability together, building it all along our borders. And look at the aircraft. This is one place which I feel very happy when I see their aircraft all spread around. They do not still have a large number of blast pens, so their aircraft would be quite vulnerable to the Indian Air Force. They would be like doing one pass over them and trying to destroy as many as possible in one pass. At the same time, with their own integrated fighting taking place, along with the strategic support force also getting integrated in their theater commands, it is now or never for the Indian Air Force and Indian Army to get integrated. If we have to win the next war with the Chinese, we have to win it together. Remember, together. So please integrate the Air Force along with the Army plans at all stages, so that when we go to war, we can hold our head high as we have held in all other wars except the 1962 war. I have finished. I am open for questions if you have any.